also prosecute the corrupt. But I fear that as tantalizing as these explanations are, they can only be tentative. A fuller picture can only emerge when we conduct a deep structural analysis to the land reform program. I highlighted above the nativist foundations of the land reform program as it privileges native origins above all else, sometimes to the exclusion of class or employment. So, for instance, the state's program does not recognize farm labor as a category for entitlement to ownership rights, except for the narrow band of labor tenants. A wealthy businessman, on the other hand, is entitled to apply for land rights if they can show historic dispossession based on race, but a farm worker cannot. Turnus Roux, formerly a professor of property law at the University of Wits, has urged that we should locate the land reform program in the political economy of the transition. Sambi Blanche, formerly professor of economic history at Stellenbosch University, has pointed to the decisive influence of the mineral energy complex in the politics of the transition. And Blanche notes that the declaration of the state of emergency by P.W. Botha in 1986 convinced the global capitalist class with financial interests in South Africa that the crisis of accumulation was real and that an implosion was possible unless the global capitalist class intervenes. One of the concerns of the global capitalist class, including Anglo-American, was the socialist orientation of the ANC. This is where they began having secret meetings with the liberation movement, including secret meetings with P.W. Botha's government. When President Mandela was released from prison in 1990, these business interests intensified. The only agenda was to attempt to influence the future policy direction of the ANC. These discussions reached their climax in 1993, when in October that year, FW de Klerk formally surrendered power under the Transitional Executive Council Act of 1993. This act allowed the ANC and the National Party to nominate equal numbers of representatives to run the state until the elections of April 1994. But the TEC ran out of cash, and it asked the International Monetary Fund for the money. The IMF agreed to give the money, but as a condition, the TEC was required to sign an undertaking on South Africa's future economic policy. When the TEC agreed to sign the statement, it was in effect agreeing to a neoliberal economic policy. And the first sign of this new policy was the adoption of GEAR in 1996, seen by many as a triumph of neoliberal economics. Blanche has referred to this as part of the elite compromises that excluded the possibility of a comprehensive redistribution policy. Tito Mboweni has largely confirmed the narrative of Sambi Blanche, although he denies that this amounted to jettisoning ANC program, and his understanding was that the IMF only required the ANC to pursue a prudent macroeconomic strategy. And so from the onset, the land reform redistributive potential was constrained by an overarching economic policy. Economic pressure of the transition was not the only constraint. There were political pressures too. Turnus Roux refers to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission as a political model designed for the transition. Its advantage is that the violations of human rights could be openly ventilated. If financial reparations are paid, they could take place along a larger scale of psychological reparation for the pain of the violation. This was not the case, however, in relation to victims of forced removals. That model placed the state at the center. Perpetrators of human rights violations in the form of land dispossession were always shielded from coming to terms with the continuing trauma of their past actions. In the legislative design, the process of restitution begins with a claim lodged by a state body, which must conduct a preliminary investigation. If the claim can be settled, a mediation is conducted, again under the auspices of the state. And the state acts as a guarantor for payments. Landowners do not have to play any role, but they can ask for a market value to their land, which for the most part